Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Parquet Courts called Human Performance. So I'll admit right out of the gate that I was a little bit tentative to cover this album. I think I've gone on record about how most lo-fi, garage rock, or garage-inspired indie rock doesn't really excite me unless the hooks are absolutely stellar or they're doing something incredibly bizarre. See the collected output from Ty Segall. But it's not saying that I dislike the genre, more that a factor that if you heard a lot of this brand of indie rock, it can start to blur together a little bit. Oh, okay, you know what? Even that's not fair, and I'll admit that Parquet Courts does stand out a little bit. Their wordy brand of art punk first materialized around the turn of the decade and immediately racked up some critical acclaim for albums like Light Up Gold and Sunbathing Animal. And yeah, I like those albums. The guitar lines are sticky, there's some really good grooves there, and you can tell the lyrics have a certain cleverness that I could definitely respect in isolated chunks, often taking broad shots at internet culture and finding something to respect. But more often than not, I got the feeling that the band hadn't quite reached the level of ambition or instrumental heft groups like Ought or FKA Viet Cong had. Good for sure, but a shade away from real greatness for me. I want to like them more than I actually did. Granted, I get the feeling that Parquet Courts are looking to change things up too, because after dropping 2 albums in 2014, the latter Content Nausea being released by only half the band under a slightly different name with a much rougher, more punk tone, and an EP that confounded critics, really left them divided, they look to follow it up a few years after touring with this release, which promised to be a more mellower yet more eclectic new record. So, okay, I'm good with Parquet Courts pushing themselves and changing up their sound a little bit, so what did we get with Human Performance? Well, it's a bit of a tricky listen. One of those indie rock records that draws a lot of thought, building on a relatively simple structure, or at least you might think it is. And while I wouldn't quite say that I was always wowed by this album, again, like most Parquet Courts album, I'd easily describe this as being very good, while only on the cusp of being great. It was still an album that inspired a lot of thought for me and a lot of re-listens, so I can applaud that at the very least. It's worth your time. So let's start off with our vocalists. Andrew Savage with the slightly more rougher howls, Austin Brown with the more methodical, slightly more reserved tones. And really, while there are points where I feel that Brown can feel a little bit too flat, and Savage can be a little bit too off-kilter and borderline incoherent for his own good, especially with the more lyrical focus, I tend to like a lot of the singing here, complete with enough harmonies and switch-ups to keep things pretty interesting. From that Beck-like half-rap delivery on a song like Captive of the Sun, to have the final 2 bars of the chorus of the title track, the vocals pile on to really anchor that hook. It sounds great. And sure, you can draw connections to acts like the Talking Heads, to the delivery of One Man No City, or to vocals you would hear off the last Ought record from Tim Darcy, but I do give this band credit for at least trying to harmonize on hooks to add a little bit more flavor, help them stand out a little bit more. And speaking of flavor, this is probably where Parquet Courts have expanded the most since their previous record, as the instrumentation and production is a fair bit more diverse from their previous albums, while still maintaining a cohesive, weathered sound that really sticks to their strengths. The acoustic guitars are very brittle and textured, the riffing is choppy but manages to compose some pretty great melodies, the drumming is pretty sparse but can definitely get interesting at points, and there really are some striking bass lines if you listen to them. And all the while, this record reaps across different brands of guitar-driven indie rock, from the more jangling punk side of Two Dead Cops or the off-kilter I Was Just Here, to touches of surf rock on Dust or Berlin Got Blurry, before dipping into hollow psychedelia on the title track or Captive of the Sun, to outright art rock on One Man No City. And really, for the most part, the instrumental choices really do click for me. I wasn't quite sure about the fizzy tapping percussion on Keep It Even or the bonus track Already Dead, which I highly recommend you get that bonus track because it really works with this album. More on that in a bit. But at the end of the day, they don't really take away from the songs. The percussion sounds fine. Similarly, how the deeper drum accents on Steady on My Mind or the muted organ touches against the eerie rattles and punchier percussion on the interlude of Keep It Even, they all managed to come together and work. And while on previous records I have taken issue with Parquet Courts stretching out some ideas unnecessarily, I'd argue that the bass and guitar interplay on One Man No City, the longest song on the album, easily kept the extended interludes plenty interesting, even if the song does feel a bit underwritten. I still really like it, and that's not even touching on the instrumental moments that I really loved, like the fuzzed out grit of Dust, or the great melodic hook accented by the subtle piano line, or the spaghetti western feel of Berlin Got Blurry that's got a really sweet interlude against that organ, or the borderline country feel of some of the guitar tones on Pathos Prairie, or pretty much all of the title track, which builds off a great hook off some great instrumental interplay, then with the 60s-esque lo-fi flutes on the interlude that kind of come out of nowhere, but I kind of really love them. But really, Most people praise Parquet Courts most for their lyrics and themes, so let's dig into that, shall we? As always, the writing is a little bit obtuse and convoluted, probably more than it should be. The sort of overwritten abstraction that can be a little bit tricky to build a solid emotional connection with, especially in comparison with acts that tend to cut to something more raw and true. And what gets intriguing is that I'd argue the band gets that too. Because while an opening tracks might imply some form of breakup or reflection at unending, the record seems much more concerned with delving into presenting a true version of their reaction in the aftermath, no matter how ugly that might seem. And there's definitely a defined arc to that revelation. The record begins with dust, remnants of death that can smother but can also be swept away pretty quickly. And from those ashes, our protagonist tries to assemble some outward-facing form of reality, put on a face that shows that everything is really okay. In other words, very much like a human performance. And what I like is how fragile and transparent everyone else seems to find that performance. They can see right through it, especially in the face of the impermanence of the setting, the world changing around them. Only serves to feed into that paranoia and isolationist streak of the following songs, where our protagonist almost seems like he wants to disappear rather than deal with his problems that he has left behind. But how that loss is defined, that comes on Captive of the Sun. Misophonia, hatred of sound, where he describes himself as a pastime streamer, which does a lot more to imply the fleeting nature of music and art in the modern age than anything else. That continued impermanence, self-contained moments that don't have a defined place or time. In other words, Parquet Courts seem to be exploring what happens after they release art to the world and how they can cope with the loss in a world shifting underfoot. And yet that art has left a mark on them that they can't quite escape, even if they want to crop themselves out of the frame on Berlin Got Blurry. And considering how I've never really been much of a fan of the whole death of the author thesis, I'm entirely okay with Parquet Courts taking a big swipe at it, showing how the marks of authorship never quite leave art or the artists themselves. And from there, the challenge comes up in owning that art, owning what you've produced and left behind. It's implied that you can escape your own legacy if you go hard and fast enough on Keep It Even, but the following two songs show that you're really just trying to cover up and rewrite your own personal narrative, using the metaphor of cops positioning themselves as the victims in New York to excuse their actions and neglect on two dead cops. Pretty harsh political statement there, and honestly, I kind of agree with it. And by the final standard edition track, it seems like Parquet Courts have accepted the reality of their narrative, well, flaws and all, and they're just pleading for others to see and realize the same. Don't put forward something that's fake. But on the bonus song, Already Dead, the authors emphasize that despite being gone, despite being dead, the music lingers in the bones and dust of the earth. That musical interlude from the female vocalist, she emphasizes themselves. You can just draw yourself in and suck yourself into that experience, because despite how fleeting it all might be, light, art, relationships, for all those who listen, all those willing to connect with it, it does make an impact after all. It does kind of stick around and last. In other words, okay, wow, when I decoded this album, there was a wealth of intelligent subtext to this album that I really liked, and yet I still feel this album is a shade away from being truly great for me. A few songs don't quite stick the landing. Paraphrased specifically feels a little bit gimmicky in the songwriting construction, even though I get the point. I'm not wild about the vocals on that song either, and I keep getting the feeling that in comparison with some of their peers, or especially some of their influences, Parquet Courts still haven't quite gone all the way in terms of consistent, distinctive melodic punch. But you know what? As it is, it's a damn fine record all the same, and for me, it's a very strong 7 out of 10. Definitely a recommendation. If you're into records drenched in old school indie rock influences, especially Wire and the Velvet Underground, this will be right up your alley. But otherwise, looking for some thought-provoking music about music, well, yeah, definitely take a listen. You won't regret it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Got the poll up here, so what'd you guys think with this album? Did you think that I went a little bit too deep analyzing it? Because honestly, I'd be curious on how you guys might decode some of the writing here, because it really does inspire a lot of thought. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming up that you want me to take a look at, I will try to find time to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.